I don't know if any of you have gone into the demographics of who are fighting this war on our behalf, but a revealing statistic came to my attention just a couple of weeks ago, and that is that fully half of the young men and women who are serving are from towns in this country of less than 10,000 population. Interesting. Who's got a clue as to why that might be the case? Towns of less than 10,000 population. Yeah, please.
Loyalty to the country or just to get out of a small town.
Okay. Could be either or both, right? Loyalty to the country or just to get out of town where there are better opportunities. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
That was going to say economic opportunities.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Please?
Economic conditions in those towns where the military is an opportunity for them economically, they might not be able to get a job that pays well.
Not able to get a job or able to get a education? Right. Okay. I think we need to be aware of these things. I am particularly pleased to be here today. I was in Missouri for 8 days back last September and October, and of all the universities that I spoke in, and they were all the state school system, not until I crossed the river over into actual Kansas City, did I have the kind of experience that I have here, the pleasure of having today, and that is speak at a community college. I found that the young people in the community college were more interested, and the older people in the community college more engaged and more caring about what was going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, last thing I ought to tie up before we start is the reason why I gave back the medal about this size they gave to me when I was going to say graduated. When I retired from the CIA after 27 years, I had worked very closely with President George Herbert Walker Bush, both when he was director of the CIA and when he was vice president. I used to see him every other morning to brief him. And so I got this really nice medallion for what's called the Intelligence Commendation Award, and it comes with a nice ribbon. You can put the ribbon on your thing and all that kind of thing. And a year ago, actually it was March of last year, when it became clear to me that the director of the CIA and the vice president were making no bones about the fact that it was their policy to torture people. I had to find some sort of way to dissociate myself from the agency that I had served for 27 years. I didn't want my grandchildren coming to me and say, "Grandpa, you work for the CIA." Yeah. Well, what's it like? What's it like torturing people? Now, am I saying that no one was ever tortured before? No, that has happened, and it's regrettable, not defensible in my view. But to make it public policy, to have the President of the United States stand up on the 6th of September of this past year and plead for permission from the Congress to implement alternative methods of interrogation, these alternative methods being prohibited from use by the U.S. Army because they happen to violate the Geneva Convention and the U.S. War Crimes Act. So, make a long story short, I felt that I had to do more than the usual to answer my grandchildren. I could say, well, I wrote 73 op-eds about it, and I made 31 speeches, but that didn't seem to do it. And so I sought this symbolic way to do that, and I handed it in to a fellow who hangs out around here. His name is Pete Hoekstra. Anybody know who he is? Yeah. He, at the time, was head of the House Intelligence Committee, so he was our representative with constitutional responsibility to oversee what the intelligence community was doing. Was he doing that? No way was he doing that. Were any of the chairs of any of the committees having to do with intelligence doing that? No, they weren't. But he was the person, he was one of the few people in our government who could have prevented this, who could have stopped it. When it came to light, he could have said, no, that's too much. That goes too far. And he didn't. And so I went into his office and I gave back I gave him a letter and I gave back my medallion. Now maybe we ought to say a word about torture, because you get your idea. A lot of people get their ideas from these TV programs that I'm told sort of glorify the utility of torture. There are a lot of people in this country that say, including very prominent senators, I won't mention his name, but his initials are Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. I was in his presence when he said publicly, the American people want us to do what we have to do. You can get a lot of information from this. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, when we had him, he was steeled against torture techniques, so we had to do what we had to do. And he smiled in a sort of sick sort of way. And most of us there were aghast. Here is a senator who makes a big thing out of being a lawyer and having been a lawyer in the U.S. Army. But that's the mentality you run into. So let me just kind of give you just a 2-minute spiel on torture, okay? I know a little bit about it. I worked for 27 years in the CIA. I was asked about 2 years ago, after torture became revealed, by a radio program producer, said, Mr. McGovern, we're going to have a 20-minute segment on torture. We're going to have both sides, of course. We know where you stand. And I said, wait a second. Both sides. He says, yeah. I said, so you're going to have somebody advocating torture? Well, I don't know about advocating, but yeah, so this person worked in the Reagan administration, thinks it's okay, and so yeah, I wanted to say, well, bring them on, but that expression has been misused before, so I just said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And then instead of just kind of going, wow, 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 is this what this country has become? I figured, well, I owed some careful thought to why I think torture is wrong. First reason is the one that John McCain always uses. Gives our country a bad name. Well, yeah. Yeah, it does give our country a bad, but is that the main reason? I don't think so. Next one up in importance, I'd suggest would be that it endangers our own troops. Our own troops get caught, our own people get caught, they're much more likely to be tortured if we torture them. And I don't mean only physical torture. All kinds of torture, okay? I'm thinking of John McCain himself and the other people who were in the Hanoi Hilton. Any of you know about the Hanoi Hilton? That's the POW enterprise that they kept prisoners of war in. If you ask any of them, and I have, how'd you get through that experience? McCain, I think, was there for 4 or 5 years. How'd you do that? How'd you get through it? You know what they say? All of them. They say, because at the end of the day, we could look and say to ourselves, well, at least we don't do that. At least we don't do that. That got them through, folks. And so, are we to deprive our own prisoners of war of that kind of solace, small that it is, but it got them through today? I don't think we want to do that. So, gives the country a bad name. It endangers our own troops, not only physically, but psychologically. The third one, what's the third one up? Oh, yeah. It brutalizes the brutalizer. Look at Abu Ghraib. Look at all the stuff that's happened. Once you let people brutalize others, they become brutalized in a very brutal way. Pardon the repetition here. And there's plenty of it. Talk to anybody who's come back from Abu Ghraib, which I have, and you'll see that result. The second most important one, many people think it's the most important reason, and there's sense behind that, is that torture doesn't work. Take it from me, folks. Torture doesn't work, and you can hear that from any professional intelligence officer. You hurt somebody enough, they're going to tell you whatever they think will get you to stop hurting them. Now, there was an amazing reflection of this recently. I wish it were funny. It's really not. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Anybody know who he is? Anybody? Mastermind of 9/11. Okay. They got him, and it's no secret that they waterboarded him. Waterboard? You make somebody think that they're drowning by sticking either their head in the water or you drip water on a little... It's pretty terrible. Well, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed holds the record of having hung on for, I think, 2 minutes and 38 seconds or something like that. But look what they got. You saw his confession. He confessed to everything except global warming. I kid you not. He confessed to a whole bevy of offenses that he couldn't possibly have done because he wasn't even around. So that's the kind of information you get from torturing people. The canard about the ticking bomb in Times Square, if you look at that closely, and several people have, it just doesn't hold up under close scrutiny. Now, the main reason that I'm against torture, because it's wrong, folks. There are some things that I believe are intrinsically wrong. One is rape. One is slavery. And torture is in that category, in my view. Always wrong. Always wrong. And so it grieves me greatly to see so many people deceived into thinking, well, for these real bad guys, not only should we do it, but it's going to be great if we do, and people will understand and forgive. Now, I had no intention of talking about torture here, but when my giving back my medallion was mentioned, I thought maybe I'd just mention how I come at that subject. When I was waiting to go on here, I overheard somebody say to somebody else, "He doesn't look like a spy." And this is not the first time that's happened. And I still don't know how to handle it, because I don't know whether to be crestfallen, or happy, or what. The reason I mention it is because it's sort of a teaching point. People get their idea of the CIA from the movies, from TV. Where else would they get it, okay? And what I'm trying to tell you is that's a very warped idea about what the CIA was set up to do and what its primary function is. And without going through a lot of detail, let me just refresh memories for those of you who have studied this in history or political science. After World War II, people said, it was really bad, this Pearl Harbor, because there were little bits and snippets of information around with the Navy and the FBI and the code breakers and the embassy in Tokyo and the Army Air Corps, and there was nobody to put it all together and say, my God, where the hell is the Japanese fleet? Or what was that Japanese submarine doing outside of Honolulu? Nobody centrally responsible for doing that. And so Harry Truman was hell-bent and determined to make sure that wouldn't happen again. He wanted somebody to have access to all the relevant information on a given subject or country. And secondly, he wanted somebody that he could go to without any policy agenda. What does that mean? Well, in Washington, it's pretty different from anywhere else, I think. Everybody's got an agenda. Everybody's got an agenda. So much so that if you say that there's one institution in government, the CIA, that doesn't have any policy agenda, 9 times out of 10, the person will sort of, shrug his shoulders and say, right. Tell me another one, Sort of reminds me of my, we tell a lot of ethnic jokes where I'm from in New York, in the Bronx. And I have an Italian brother-in-law. He makes fun of the Irish. Tells all kinds of untrue things about them. And one of his famous little jokes, in quotes, is, why do all Irishmen have droopy shoulders and flat foreheads? Anybody know? No? Well, it's because when you ever ask them a question, they go, I don't know. You tell them the answer, they go, that's right! Not true, by the way. But the point being that I worked for 27 years in this place, And we were the only act in town that had career protection for telling it like it is. LBJ comes to us and says, hey, these blue suit guys tell us that we can bomb the hell out of North Vietnam, close off the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and we'll win the war. What do you think? And we say, don't listen to the blue suit guys. They don't know anything about war. I'm revealing some prejudice here. I'm an infantry officer. They bomb stuff from up here, and they never see anybody, they never see any blood, and they think they can do anything. This is relevant to today because they're the same blue suit guys saying we can zap Iran now, and everything's going to be hunky-dory. Anyhow, we told LBJ, no way. We know the North Vietnamese leadership. We know what bombing can't do, and one thing it can't do is not only make Hanoi give up, but it can't even seal off the Ho Chi Minh Trail, Mr. President, because there is no Ho Chi Minh Trail. We're not talking about I-66 or I-95. It's a bunch of little trails under a big jungle canopy. There's no way you can do that, okay? That's what we told the President. Of course, we got the Defense Department very angry with us. We got the State Department very angry with us, but that was our job, and we were protected. Now, the President went ahead and did it anyway. That's the other lesson. Presidents are not required to follow the advice of intelligence. He had other political reasons. He was a strange president because he didn't want to be the first United States president to lose a war. Huh? And there's a guy around today who doesn't want to be the second U.S. president to lose a war that is already lost. Anyhow, getting back to the main purposes of CIA, we were to tell it like it is. Harry Truman wanted to be able to go to one director. In those days, they were all men. Hopefully, we'll have a woman director sometime soon. He wanted to say, Mr. Director, I want to know what you really think. I want to know what you and those 2 universities worth of specialists you have out there in the woods of Virginia, I want to know what you really think about this. I don't care what the State Department says. I don't care what the Defense Department, they always say the Russians are 9'5". I know you say they're 5'9" and shrinking. I want to know what you really think, okay? Now, put yourself in the position of a president, okay? You have big decisions to make. What arms to procure? How many ICBMs to build? Or more recently, should I send more troops into Iraq? Wouldn't you like to have one place to go where you could count on getting an honest answer? Where you could be sure that the person you ask is not going to tell you something he knows or she knows you want to know, that you want to hear? Of course. And so this president, and it's amazing to me because his father was head of the CIA at one point, this president has frittered away an essential tool to the orderly making of foreign policy decisions. Just frittered away. And he's got around him now a small, ever-shrinking coterie of advisors. There are some technical intelligence terms that I'll just use one here. We call what the president has around him a self-licking ice cream cone. I was kidding about the technical language, guys. But get the image in your mouth. Get the image in your I'm an ice creamaholic, so yeah. Get the image in your mind and think about it. Now, who orders the flavors? I'll give you the initials. Dick Cheney orders the flavors. And they all lick from the same ice cream thing, and the president hears what they know he wants to hear. That's an incredibly dangerous situation. And if further proof were needed, just look at the last 4 years. Just look at the last 4 years in Iraq. So anyhow, that's what we were set up to do, and that's what we did. And it was heady work. Toward the end of my career, I was one of those privileged to brief the Vice President, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff every other morning. We had 2 teams of 4 each. And so on any given morning, I would be seeing 2 or 3 of those gentlemen I just mentioned, and the other team would be seeing the others. One-on-one with all these folks. The only exception was the Vice President, George Bush the first, often invited his National Security Advisor, Don Gregg, to take part. But we had this very sensitive document that we had shepherded and prepared and seen written the night before, and then we had whatever supplementary material we thought the person needed to know. And so I know a little bit about how the system works. And we took a great pride in telling it like it is. Now, the craft of intelligence analysis, and that's what I'm going to be talking about most, I should have mentioned, and I will very briefly, that people say, well, how does torture, how does revolution, how about special forces or special units going into Iran now? How does that square with the CIA's principal mission to have all the information and tell it without fear or favor? Were you to ask me that, I would say, it doesn't. It doesn't. So how do we explain that the same agency is tasked to do these two very different things? It's an accident of history. After World War II, we inherited, that is, our government inherited some really, really special people, smart as could be, imaginative. It was called the Office of Strategic Services, OSS. Anybody hear of the OSS before? Okay, all right. Now, they ran incredibly clever operations in the European theater and in the Far East. And so here it is, 1947, the war is over, and they're there, and they come to Washington, and somebody says, well, what are we going to do with these people? They're from law firms, they're from business, they're from academe. You know, should we just send them back? At a time when the Soviet Union is overrunning Eastern Europe, funding communist parties to take over in places like France and Italy, you know, really being very active on the world scene. Well, the question answered itself. Now, we can't get rid of this capability. And then the next question was, well, where are we going to put it? And to my great regret, somebody said, well, we're creating the CIA. Let's put it there. And so they inserted into the legislation one sentence that said, the Central Intelligence Agencies shall also discharge such functions as the President and the National Security Council shall from time to time direct. One sentence that gives the President legal authority to use the CIA or that covert part of the CIA to overthrow governments, to start wars in Central America, or to try to knock down the Iranian regime. I don't defend that at all. I call it a structural fault, and it needs to be repaired. But that's the way it was. The analysts didn't have much to do, didn't have anything to do with this other stuff. And the notion, those of you who know about organizations, if you can picture one person being responsible for both tasks, you know, let's say Bill Casey, who was the director of Central Intelligence during the Nicaraguan War. As a matter of fact, he was running that war, okay, running the Contras. He goes up on Capitol Hill, and the senators, the representatives say, well, how's the war going? And he says, peachy, it's going great. Who the hell's going to believe him? Credibility is the most credibility is the most precious asset for a person in that kind of position. And if somebody's running a war, he's not going to be able to comment honestly about how well it's doing, nor are his underlings. And so the whole agency is sitting written off. They're working for Bill Casey. What are they going to tell us that we don't know, or how are they going to fudge the evidence?